Hi, my name is Keith Cooper, Northlight Images, and in this video I'm going to try and address a question I'm asked quite often, and it concerns the best print quality from a printer. Now, I'm asked this in a lot of different ways, so it can be which printer has the best print quality, it depends. Which paper gives the best print quality, once again, it depends. The problem I have in answering the question is that there is no well-defined measure of print quality that I can give. Now, there are lots of technical things. I can talk about profile gamut volumes and things like that, but when it comes down to it, they don't actually mean much to most people. And if I'm honest, I don't even use them for my own evaluations of what is a good print. So in this, I'm going to try and look at some of the aspects of what I think contributes to a good print, what I mean by print quality, what I regard as acceptable print quality, and some hints and tips on how you might be able to decide for yourself what you mean by print quality, what's relevant to you, and what matters, particularly if you're buying a new printer or thinking of buying a new printer. Because I do appreciate there's a lot of choice. Now I get to test a lot of printers, so I have lots of test prints. Right up front, I have to say that all of these test prints here, and they were not all produced on this printer here, which happens to be a Canon Pro 200. There were several printers I've tested of late, better ones, worse ones. Unless I look on the back of most of these prints, I cannot tell you which printer I used. Now, this may not be the answer people want, and I'll come back to this later, but essentially, almost any of the printers I've tested recently in the last few years are capable of producing excellent looking prints. So the first question has to be, print quality, can you actually see it? Well, I would say you can sometimes see bad print quality. However, it depends just what we're considering as bad. Now, look at basic printers. Different types of ink, for example. Are pigment inks better than dye-based inks? Well, pigment inks will probably last a long while, whereas dye-based inks, and this is not if you're using cheap knockoff third-party inks, will probably last a fairly long while. So the differences are between a fairly long while and a very long while. I'm going to say that on using printer manufacturer inks, so Canon inks in a Canon printer, Epson inks in an Epson printer, most people are not going to have any problems in print longevity. That's because the vast majority of people do not produce prints for museums and other purposes where such things matter. Now, if they do matter to you, then you'll look into that and you'll decide certain types of pigment inks are better for what you use. How the prints look is perhaps in that aspect you want good looking prints, but you also want them to last. But I'm going to say that although quite a lot of people ask me about print longevity, it really doesn't matter one jot to most people. And indeed, for most prints that I produce, I'm really not that bothered by it. Now, I do produce prints sometimes for people, and I know they want prints printed on paper that will last, and they want prints that will last. I will do that. They pay for the privilege. That's my top tier of printing, as it were. But there's an awful strong element of marketing in that as well, as there is in a lot of printing. Now, I've looked elsewhere at some of the aspects of printer specifications that are glossed over and obfuscated by aspects of print marketing. Always remember, when you're looking at stuff like this, if somebody sells printers, they are marketing stuff to you. Now, I don't sell printers. I look at marketing things. I don't genuinely care what printer people buy. It has no difference to me. So pick whatever you like. More to the point, pick what you can afford and what you think will be useful for you. But back to the inks, ink types. Pigments, yes, archival. Dye-based inks, you can make very nice prints on dye-based prints. And here is one print that I happen to know was printed. It's on a metallic paper, was printed with dye-based inks. And it's a really nice looking print. And in fact, because of the smoothness and glossiness of the paper, the dye-based inks that I've tried on this are slightly better than the pigments. However, I will say I very rarely choose to use a paper like this. So would that be a reason to use dye-based inks? Probably not necessarily. Am I saying that pigment inks are better looking? No, I'm not. I'm saying they have more potential, but they are different. So pigment inks, the strengths lay in strong dark colours. Dyes, sometimes on some papers, and remember there's always a lot of caveats in all this stuff, look good with lighter colours on glossier papers. Just a general thing. But look at the detailed coverage I've done. If you're interested in a particular printer, don't just buy dye or pigment based on some notion that one is better than the other. It is quite a complex story. If you want to see the complexities of it, look at what I've written about the Epson ET8550. Now that has a pigment black ink and dye inks as well. And the combination and interplay between those are what makes it an interesting printer, but also they tell you an awful lot about how different inks work on paper. Now, the media, well, that's another big problem. We'll come back to that in a moment. Inks. Are more inks better? In general, yes. You tend to find the higher quality printers have more inks. That is not necessarily because they give a wider gamut, that's a range of colours that can be supported. It is just that if you use a test image like this, you tend to find that colour gradations and changes in colour are smoother with more inks. Now, of course, that depends how the ink's being used, and that depends on the printer. There's no hard and fast rule, but in general, the higher quality printers tend to have more inks. More inks tend to equate with better results. By the way, don't just assume when you see that a printer has a grey ink in the mix that somehow magically it's going to print black and white well. The grey ink is there to dilute and smooth the transitions of the colour inks as well. So it takes the place of, say, light colour ink. So you might have a magenta ink and a light magenta ink. Or you might have a magenta ink and a grey. Now the grey can be mixed with the magenta to give a lighter colour. Quite complex. I'll try and cover some of that in the actual reviews I do of the printers. Always look at those for more detail, and also the written articles as well. They always are where I tend to put more detail. So we've said that inks don't make necessarily that much of a difference. One little caveat there, if you're interested in printing black and white images a lot, I would say that the choice for me is almost always to pick a pigment ink printer. The pigment inks handle black and white better. That's not to say in any way that you can't produce acceptable looking black and white on dye-based printers. It's usually more work to produce images. So out of the box, pigment ink printers tend to produce good black and white. Certainly the newer ones. It's quite noticeable in that effect. And they may have multiple blacks, multiple greys. Now, in that instance, it does make a difference, but that also contributes to the colour. I picked up this test image, by the way. I would say have a look at stuff I've written and videos I've done about using test images. They help you evaluate printers without looking necessarily immediately at pictures that you've printed. Now, I know the scene, I like this picture, I know when it was taken. There are some aspects of it that are good for testing printers, others are not, because I've got too much involvement with knowing what it should look like. Using test images like this and the one on the screen here, which is downloadable from the Northlight Images website. They're free, I've got lots of different ones. Using these test images gives you a much better way of evaluating prints. So, when I'm evaluating these prints, what am I evaluating? Am I just evaluating the quality of the printer? No, I am not. I need a whole system of colour management. That's profiles, colour profiles. I need colour management on my screen. I need to know that what's going to the printer is as good as it can get. And that's where color management comes in. So I make profiles with targets like this image here. That's read into a device and it produces the profiles. Use profiles. If you can't use profiles with a printer, take that as a hint that it is not a printer that is optimized for photo printing quality. Profiles should always be available and used if you want the best quality. Certainly for color images. Black and white, there may be a black and white print mode for the driver for your printer. Try that out, see if it works. It may be better, it may not be better. It depends, you'll need to check it out. But anyway, color management, very important. Getting your screen right, getting your prints right, getting your profiles done. All of my best prints come from a good use of color management. Now, somebody's going to say, yeah, but you've not actually said how you tell the difference between printers. This is the bit that people probably don't want to hear. And it's why I said I normally write on the back of prints what printer was used, what paper it is, and what settings. That's because there is precious little difference between most printers these days. If your photography is up to it, big if that. If your editing of the images and the files and your color management is up to it, if you've picked a good quality media, doesn't have to be original equipment media, doesn't have to be Canon media or Epson media, can be other well-known ones. Hahnemühle, for example, several companies I've looked at here in the UK, Innova, for example, produce excellent media with the appropriate color management and profiles. So we've got all of that lot, and then it comes to the printer. What difference does the printer make? Well, it turns out relatively little. Now, I've done some analysis looking at printing of fine detail in pictures on Epson and Canon printers, and that's interesting and instructive to look at. But we're talking about fine detail that in a print this size, I would need a magnifying glass to see, a strong magnifying glass at that. So there is always that question of how much use is this extra print detail? I don't know. I like to see detail in prints, but unless I put super strong glasses on, I can't really look at prints much closer than this. And I'm going to say, if you regularly look at your prints at this distance looking for detail, then you are missing a trick because nobody else does. If I print two pictures, let's say I've got an Epson printer and a Canon printer of broadly similar specifications. Now, remember those specifications have had the dead hand of marketing work over them, so you have to interpret them with care. Let's say we've got two broadly similar printers from a technical point of view. Both have similar numbers of inks, both have similar types of inks. Is one better than the other? How could I tell? Well, some papers work better on some printers. This is watercolour paper. I've even printed on a canvas here just to test what could be done. That's a luster finish paper over there. Some printers, you can print the same image on two printers and you can see one just looks better. Does that mean the printer is better? Unfortunately not, because so much is involved in paper choice, image choice, editing, and you can't really tell. Now, if I took two photos, printed them, and say, let's take the test image here. If I print this twice, you'll think, well, I should be able to say one is better. They may not be the same, but that doesn't mean that one is better than the other. I'm looking at one level with a test image like this, I'm looking for gross errors. I'm looking for banding in color transitions. I'm looking for obviously wrong looking colors. A lot of that is color management though. But I've still got these two prints. I put them next to each other under good lighting and I look at them very carefully and I go, this printer is better. Does that mean I can say in general this is better? No, it doesn't. It means under controlled lighting, putting the prints next to each other, looking at them with a hand lens, really close up at the sort of detail that no one ever does. One of them I slightly like the look of a bit better, and that's all there is to it. Now, if I take a top-end printer and a relatively cheap desktop printer, I may be able to see the image looks coarser, the colours don't look as smooth. That's, fairly clear. That's with them next to each other under good lighting. What about if I put the picture up on a wall and the second picture I put up on another wall somewhere else? I then get somebody to move them around randomly, so effectively I don't know which picture is which. How often can I tell which printer was actually used? Nowhere near as often as I'd like. There simply isn't the degree of difference when you're looking at prints on their own. So what that means is that if I want this print, if I want a colour print doing, and I want it on the wall, and say I'm just printing on an ordinary luster paper rather than a super gloss like this. If I want a particular picture like that, and I put it on a wall, I almost certainly can't tell you what printer I used. And that's, with all the testing I do, I still can't tell you what printer was used for it. Now, I happen to know that some printers may excel slightly in the handling of some colours. Once again, depends on the profile, depends on the paper in use. But knowing that and being able to use it to look at a print on a wall and tell you which printer something was done with, it just doesn't work that way. Now, that is not what people want to hear. Simply people want simple decisions made for them. X is best, buy X. I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. If you've followed any of my printer reviews and articles about printing and stuff like that in the videos, you will have known I was going to come to this answer, because it's almost certainly up to you. I can produce great looking prints on almost any printer I've looked at over the last couple of years. You should be able to as well. It's about having the right media, the skills, the photography skills, everything together to make a great print. The impact of the printer itself doesn't make that much difference. Now, in general, the better printers, the bigger printers, produce nice looking prints more easily and perhaps take less work to produce great looking prints. But there's really not that much difference. There hasn't been a significant difference in printers for 10 years now, at least. 15 years ago, it was much easier to spot the difference. Now, with good papers, colour management, inks, papers, the printers make relatively little difference. Now, that means that when somebody said which is the best printer, I don't necessarily include print quality in that. One, because I don't genuinely know exactly what most people mean by when they say print quality, but also it's things about usability. It's about how easy the printer is to use, what software you get with it, what support there is with it. There's so much more than the basic print technology, because the print technology in many ways plateaued. It is not getting that much better. There is diminishing returns. However, new printers are in general much easier to use. This is the Canon Pro 200. I tested over 10 years ago the Pro 100 when it came out. Pro 100, if I'm honest, I never greatly liked. Particularly its enforced margins on art papers. Its whole system it relied on just two buttons. There was no display on it or anything like that. The 200 is at heart a very similar printer, but it's vastly easier to use. It is much easier to produce nice looking prints on a Canon Pro 200 than it was to produce nice looking prints on the Pro 100. That's the progress. That's what I mean when it's better. Actual print quality? I don't know. What I would say, if you're still concerned over this, ask questions with the video. Drop me an email if you like. This particular video is based on somebody asking me a whole series of questions about this printer here. So I'm always happy to answer the questions. But I'm sorry if I don't give the answers that you want. If you wanted me to say, yes, such and such a printer is the best print quality, you're not going to get, you wouldn't be here, you wouldn't be at this stage of the video if you were asked after simple answers. Great prints don't come from simple answers. They come from great photography and knowing how to use a printer. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. I hope it's been of use. Feedback is much appreciated. Please do subscribe to the channel. That is appreciated. And thank you very much.